From an early age, we are taught to shape our image according to what others expect of us. Parents, teachers, friends, society all seem to have a predefined mold of what it means to be someone of value. And, naturally, we try to fit into this mold. We wear a mask, a persona, that helps us function in the world, but which over time can become a prison. It's as if, in trying to be what is expected, we leave behind what we truly are. And it is at this point, according to Carl Jung, that emptiness begins to emerge. Jung understood the human psyche as a vast universe, where there is much more than just conscious thoughts. He believed that, at the center of everything, there exists something he called the self, an inner deep core that represents our totality, not only who we are now, but who we can become. The self is more than a social identity. It is the union of all our parts, conscious and unconscious. However, as we ignore this center, we move away from a life with real meaning. The emptiness that so many people feel today is not just sadness or loneliness. It's a feeling of being disconnected from oneself, as if something is missing, but without knowing exactly what. And the truth is that this something is often our own essence. We are so accustomed to living outwardly, seeking approval, success, recognition, that we forget to turn our eyes inward. We forget to ask, who am I truly, without the roles I play every day? This disconnection doesn't happen all at once. It builds silently, in the small choices we make to please others, in the times we silence our desires for fear of rejection, and in the moments we ignore intuition because it seems irrational. Gradually, we distance ourselves from what is most authentic in us. And the price we pay for this is high, a profound feeling of existential emptiness, which no external achievement seems to fill. Jung saw this emptiness not as an error, but as a symptom, a calling of the soul. When we feel empty, we are not broken. We are, in fact, being invited to return inward, to that which we have been leaving aside along the way. And this journey of return requires more than philosophical reflections or inspirational readings. It requires courage. Courage to stop hiding behind the persona and start listening to what the self, this vital center of the psyche, is trying to say. Because it is only when we begin to reconnect with it that the emptiness begins, at last, to transform. But reconnection with the self doesn't happen in a simple way. When beginning this inner journey, we encounter something that we often avoid throughout our lives, our own shadow. Carl Jung used this term to name all those parts of ourselves that we reject, deny, or repress. Fears, anger, impulses, forbidden desires, vulnerabilities. Everything that, because it doesn't fit into the ideal image we want to show to the world, and even to ourselves, is pushed into the unconscious. Yet, what is repressed does not disappear. It only hides. And hidden, it begins to silently corrode our vitality. The emptiness that many feel today is, in part, the echo of these disowned parts of the psyche trying to find space. It is the weight of what has not been lived, of what has been censored by fear, shame, or guilt. And the more we suppress, the more disintegrated we become. Jung said that the shadow needs to be recognized and integrated, not fought against. The common mistake is to think of it as something purely negative, as a dark side to be eliminated. But in truth, it is a powerful source of psychic energy, creativity, authenticity. Within the shadow lie genuine parts that we were taught to hide, but which are part of who we are. By ignoring them, we deny ourselves the chance to be whole. Imbalance arises when the persona, this social mask we wear to survive, takes absolute control. We try to always appear calm, pleasant, well-adjusted, but inside we are full of frustrations, unexpressed desires, contained emotions. And this internal division creates anguish. It's as if we are constantly at war with ourselves, trying to maintain appearances while suffocating what we truly feel. The result is a chronic feeling of dissatisfaction, an emotional hole that no distraction can cover for very long. In many cases, this shadow manifests without our noticing. Through emotional outbursts, self-sabotage, problematic relationships, addictions, or repetitive patterns that trap us in cycles of suffering. The unconscious finds ways to make the shadow emerge, even when we try to ignore it. And the more we resist facing it, the more it controls us in hidden ways. Therefore, if emptiness is a sign of disconnection from the self, it is also a cry from the shadow asking for recognition. The cure is not in eliminating it, but in embracing it, in looking inward with honesty, and recognizing that even our most difficult parts carry important truths. Transformation only begins when we have the courage to descend into the depths of the psyche and accept what we have always tried to avoid. As we begin to recognize the shadow, we also start to perceive how much of our life is influenced by forces that we cannot see clearly. Jung believed that the unconscious was not just a repository of repressed content, but an active dimension, full of symbols, archetypes, and its own intentions. When we move away from the self and neglect the shadow, it is precisely the unconscious that begins to manifest, trying somehow to return us to the path of totality. Many of the emptiness we feel, the crises we face, the sensations of disorientation that suddenly take hold of us, have deep roots in this inner world. And since we are not in the habit of listening to it, it speaks to us in indirect ways. A pattern of relationships that repeats itself without rational explanation, a constant sabotage of one's own objectives, a feeling of anguish that has no visible cause. All of this can be an expression of the unconscious trying to show us something that has been ignored for too long. Dreams are one of these doors. Jung saw dreams as symbolic messages coming from the deepest layers of the psyche. Each image, each dream figure, each seemingly absurd situation may contain clues about what is unbalanced within us. They are not mere illusions of the sleeping mind, but coded revelations of forgotten parts of the soul. And when we take dreams seriously, we begin to understand that the unconscious is not our enemy. It is in fact an ally in the process of self-knowledge. Beyond dreams, there are spontaneous impulses, synchronicities, and even physical symptoms that arise as manifestations of unresolved internal conflicts. They are ways in which the psyche seeks to restore lost balance. The problem is that, instead of listening to these signals, we have the habit of stifling them with distractions, superficial diagnoses, or immediate escapes. Thus, the emptiness deepens. The more we avoid diving into what lies behind the symptoms, the further we move away from the possibility of real change. Jung did not see the unconscious as an obscure territory to be dominated, but as a space to be explored with humility. He believed that only by integrating unconscious contents, that is, by making them conscious, could we find true meaning. And this doesn't happen through ready-made formulas, but through attentive listening to the signals that our own psyche sends us every day. The emptiness in this context is more than suffering. It is an invitation to awaken, a silent call to look inward, where the root of what we truly lack resides. Even in the face of all this internal calling, it is common for us to try to silence the emptiness with everything the world offers us as a promise of fulfillment. Modern culture is a master at selling quick solutions for deep existential pains. The logic is simple and seductive. If you achieve a certain position, buy a certain product, live a certain relationship, then you will finally feel complete. But Jung saw this movement clearly. The more we try to find outside what can only be resolved within, the further we move away from the real meaning of life. And this doesn't happen only in big decisions. The attempt to fill the void is present in small daily compulsions. That constant need to be busy, excessive consumption of social media, the incessant search for entertainment, the desire to appear happy even when everything is crumbling inside. The promise is always the same. Distract yourself from what you feel, and with time, it will pass. But what is not seen is not overcome. What is ignored does not disappear. It only transforms into a diffuse malaise, chronic anxiety, a weariness of existence itself. Jung pointed out that true fullness cannot be bought, nor achieved through social approval or status. He knew that the feeling of being complete only arises when we begin to approach the self, that inner totality that unites all our parts. And the path to this doesn't involve accumulation, but integration. True wealth is not in what one has, but in what one is. And being, in the deepest sense of the word, requires presence, sincerity, and confrontation with one's own internal truth, even when it is uncomfortable. The illusion of external fullness is reinforced all the time because it is easier to sell solutions than to sustain processes of real transformation. But the soul is not satisfied with substitutes. No relationship, no matter how intense, can compensate for the absence of oneself. No material goods can heal internal abandonment. And there is no perfect image on social media that can replace the silence necessary to hear the voice of the psyche. Of course, pleasures, achievements, and affection have their value. Jung never preached asceticism or denial of concrete life. But he emphasized that all of this only gains meaning when it comes as a consequence of a life aligned with one's own essence. When we use these things as anesthesia, the emptiness only changes form, and the search continues, tiring, insatiable. Therefore, the healing process begins with a profound decision, to stop fleeing from oneself and to begin, in fact, to listen to what the inner life is trying to show. When we finally stop looking outside for what we lack inside, something begins to change. Not instantaneously, but as the beginning of a slow return to the center. Jung called this process individuation, a psychic journey toward wholeness. It's not about becoming perfect, but about becoming whole. About gathering all the fragmented parts that we've been leaving behind in the name of acceptance, security, or belonging. Individuation is, in essence, the path back to the self. This process is not comfortable. It requires internal ruptures, requires that we let certain illusions about who we believed ourselves to be die. It requires courage to look at the shadow, as we've seen, and willingness to listen to the unconscious contents that emerge when we silence ourselves. But it is also a path of reunion with that which has real meaning, a crossing toward a type of freedom that doesn't depend on external circumstances, but on an internal coherence that begins to build little by little. To individuate is to learn to live with more wholeness, to recognize that within us there are contradictions, conflicts, lights, and shadows, and that all of this is part of who we are. It is to stop seeking an ideal of being enlightened and to begin embracing the human that inhabits us. Jung did not believe that spiritual evolution occurred through the negation of matter or through distancing oneself from ordinary life. On the contrary, he saw true transformation as something that occurs within real life, with its daily challenges, its relationships, its pains and joys. Along this path, we begin to perceive that the emptiness was not the enemy, it was the signal. It was the internal alarm that something essential had been lost, neglected, abandoned. And when we begin to rescue these lost parts, our forgotten dreams, our ignored intuition, our stifled strength, the emptiness transforms into space, a fertile space where new truths can be born, where life at last begins to make sense not because it has become easy, but because it is being lived with more authenticity. Jung reminds us that no one can make this journey for us. Individuation is profoundly personal. There are no shortcuts, no formulas, but there are tools, there are symbols, there is guidance, and above all, there is the certainty that, even in moments of greatest confusion, something within us knows the way. This something is the self, and it has always been there, patiently waiting for us to turn inward. Because it is only from this reunion that true healing begins to become possible. When we begin to understand that the emptiness we feel is a calling and not a failure, something within us awakens. The inevitable question arises, what now? What can I do with all that I've discovered about myself? Jung did not offer quick solutions, but he believed in the importance of acting consciously, because it is not enough to just intellectually understand the process. It is necessary to give body to the transformation, with practices that bring us closer and closer to the self. The first of these practices is the cultivation of inner listening, and one of the most powerful ways to do this is by paying attention to dreams. Not as mere nocturnal curiosities, but as symbolic messages from the soul. Writing down dreams, reviewing them, reflecting on their images and emotions, all of this opens a direct bridge to the unconscious. Jung saw dreams as compensation for the conscious state. If we live in a disconnected way, they show us what is missing. If we are trapped in illusions, they show us the truth we deny. Besides this, there is the space for reflective writing, a simple but profoundly revealing practice. When we put on paper what we feel, without censorship, without judgment, We open a path for hidden contents to reveal themselves. Sometimes, while writing, we encounter thoughts we didn't even know existed. And it is in this honest contact with one's own truth that the process of integration begins to gain strength. Another fundamental tool is conscious solitude. Don't confuse this with isolation. Solitude is not the absence of people, it is the presence of oneself. It is reserving moments to be with oneself, without distractions, without masks. It is in this silence that the deepest parts of the psyche can emerge. It is where the shadow presents itself more clearly, and the self begins to whisper paths. The modern world pushes us outward all the time. Solitude is an act of resistance, of return. And for those who wish to deepen this process in a more guided way, Jungian therapy is a valuable path. Not as a cure coming from outside, but as a safe space where the soul can speak, where symbols can be understood, and where the process of individuation gains direction. The therapist in this case is not a fixer, but a journey companion, someone who helps decipher the internal maps of the psyche. In the end, what Jung teaches us is that emptiness is not an end, but a beginning. It marks the point where the soul decides it can no longer live by halves. And as difficult as it may seem at the start, this discomfort is the first step toward a life with truth, with purpose, with meaning. It is not a punishment, it is a calling, an invitation to dive into oneself, gather the lost parts, and return to the world not as someone who tries to appear whole, but as someone who, in fact, is becoming whole. If this video touched something in you, if it awakened reflections or helped you to look inside with more clarity, consider leaving a like. This helps the content reach more people who may also be dealing with this same emptiness. And if you want to continue exploring themes like this, with depth and meaning, subscribe to the channel. Here, the journey is inward, and you don't need to walk alone.